Mac Power Users, episode 625. Apple as the Measuring Stick with Austin Evans. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Mac Power Users. I am David Sparks, and joined today, as always, by Mr. Stephen Hackett. Hello, Stephen.
Hey, David. How are you?
I am excellent. I'm getting ready to take a little vacation for a few days. Can't wait to do that. Haven't done that for a while. And we have an excellent guest here today. Welcome to the show, Austin Evans.
Hey, how's it going?
Austin, we've been booking you for a long time. We met, you and I have only met one time. It was outside the hall there at WWDC back when that was a thing.
Aw.
But a lot of our listeners probably know Austin. He is a world famous YouTuber and smart tech guy. He's a co-host of the Test Drivers, the podcast you've been doing with Mike Hurley, and man, all around nice guy. Thanks for coming in.
Well, it's very kind. No, thank you for having me. I'm really excited. I feel like you guys have been doing this for so long. I'm glad I'm finally able to hop on and chat for a little bit.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I love about having you on the show, Austin, is that you work not only with Apple gear, but you work with all the gear. And even, you've got some really great stuff out there on video games. And I just love watching your channel because I learn something every time I watch one of your videos and I really enjoy it. But having someone with your kind of breadth of tech knowledge come in to talk to the Mac Power Users audience, I think you can really bring something to us today.
Oh, I hope so. Especially, I feel like this is a good time of year, like last year was so crazy. And I always like this kind of early part of the year because it's like CES is over. It's time to kind of reset and kind of get ready for, the April event and all kinds of stuff that's sort of kind of nonstop for the rest of the year. So I always appreciate a little bit of calm before the storm.
Yeah, I never really thought about that, but this is like the one time of the year tech people can breathe.
Yeah, you picked a perfect time for a vacation.
Don't worry, it'll be, March and April events before we know it. So
exactly.
So Austin, you've been making tech content for a long time, and like David said, you cover a bunch of stuff. In fact, in More Power Users, the longer ad-free version of the show, we're going to talk about folding phones in particular because you have a lot of hands-on, like I was going to say pockets on, but that's not quite the right phrase. Hands-on experience with folding phones. But before we get to the tech, tell us a little bit about you and how you got into this business.
Yeah. So I started making content in 2009. So it was actually the iPod Touch that got me started. So I was super amped to get my first iPod Touch. I remember I was like on YouTube watching like app reviews, when the App Store was brand new. I had on my PC, I had like a bunch of apps pre-downloaded in iTunes. So as soon as I got my iPod, I could just plug it in and like load up. Like, I remember what it was at the time. It was just the super, super early stuff. But that's how I kind of got started. Just like I've always kind of had this sort of interest in technology. And then sort of YouTube, I started watching content. And then pretty quickly, I was like, I started creating it and then just made more and more and more. And then before I knew it, that was the gig,
Remember when everyone lost their mind over Monkey Ball? You guys remember that?
Yes, Super Monkey Ball. Well, that was like especially with the iPod Touch, that was really the way that they had advertised it in those early days of like, it's kind of like the mobile gaming thing. You got the App Store and everything. Who needs a PSP or a DS? You got an iPod Touch. And I remember as a kid being like, yeah, iPod, let's go.
Yeah, Apple was really into that iPod Touch as the gaming platform. That was a weird time. They were really into it for like a year and a half, and then never talked about it again.
Oh, it's so sad. Like that iPod Touch was like, for me, that was the gateway for so many things. Because at the time, like I didn't really have much. I mean, I had like an old like Windows Vista laptop, but that was pretty much it as far as like actual kind of like, quote unquote, like real tech. I didn't even have like a phone at the time. But that iPod Touch was just such a great way, especially in the early jailbreaking scene. Like I was so into like making like my own themes and adding like a million nonsense, like downloaded things from like Cydia. Like it was just a really fun time to kind of just really have fun and dig into tech and kind of really make it my own. And I know for me, it was just like, it was a very sort of formative time where I really kind of got to learn a lot about technology by kind of being very hands-on with it in a way that I feel like these days just, you activate your new phone, you download a couple of apps, change a couple of widgets, you kind of call it a day. But back then, it just felt like it's just sort of the world of possibilities of what you could do to kind of customize your device.
It's really remarkable to me, the number of geeks I know that started with some form of I just wanted to customize things. I mean, going back to the old Macs, to me it was like trying to make it do things. And, customizing the original Mac, like you could go in and alter the icons. I mean, you could do so much stuff on that system. And for so many of us, just doing things like changing colors on icons was our first kind of deep dive into this stuff. And I think that was kind of where the love affair started for me. And I think that's true for a lot of people.
Yeah, we're a picky group, and we want things our way. And it's interesting, Austin, you talking about that time, and we're talking as if it's in the past, but we have seen the last couple of years, some of that customization start to come back in, at least on the mobile side, and I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. I mean, you see what people do with shortcuts. It's wild to me. It really kind of reminds me of those old days, I mean, because, in that first iPod, I was excited because I just wanted a background, right? I didn't want a black background. I wanted like some cool like wallpaper and then changing the icons. And now the fact that you can do a lot of that kind of right out of the box, it's kind of removed a lot of the reason for, all the jailbreaking and all the kind of the modifications that, we used to do back in the day. But it kind of makes sense, right? As things sort of develop and things get much, much more full feature out of the box. You don't need a bunch of cool developers coming up with wacky ideas of, overloading the 128 megs of RAM on your iPod Touch or whatever, It's nice to kind of see that it's just like, oh, I want to change this? Boom, 5 seconds. I can set it up or download some cool shortcut and I'm ready to go.
So you started in this because you were interested in it. At what point did you sort of look up and realize that this could be more than just a hobby or a way to explore your own interests and it turn into something bigger that could maybe even pay the bills one day?
Yeah. So for context, I started when I was 16. So that was when I kind of started the channel, or I had the channel a couple years, but that was when I actually started uploading to the channel. And it was pretty quick because at the time, the YouTube Partner Program was just rolling out. So a few of like the really big creators, like Phil DeFranco and I think like Ray William Johnson, a couple of those people, they had the Partner Program and, they were actually starting to make money and hire their first employees and everything. But for me, it was more of like, oh, this is just really fun. Like I had never had a platform where I would be getting comments and ratings and be getting hundreds of views on videos. Like that was a really exciting thing for me. And so I knew sort of in the back of my head that sort of making money was a potential, but that really wasn't like a big motivation for the first, little while. Like I tried to get, I signed up for the partner program, like I think 3 different times before I actually finally got accepted. But I was just making content because it was something that really excited me. It was such a cool feeling to be able to make stuff and actually kind of get like that real-time feedback, So that was kind of how it started. But about a year in, when I actually got Partner and I got my first check, I remember $160. I got that check in and I was like, oh boy, here we go. I was all in. I was like, nah, sorry, Mom, I'm not going to college. I'm making YouTube videos. And that conversation didn't go so well, but thankfully it worked out.
I'm sure that conversation was hard. I know my own version of it. And, I went to school, I had a career. I didn't, and we started Relay and really it was me walking away from the career I'd been building. I remember telling my parents and in particular my in-laws, like, hey, I'm going to go chase this thing that we've been building on the side. And it doesn't matter like if you went to school or not, or if you're 16 or if you're 26 or 46, like anytime you make that decision, those conversations are hard. And, David in a way is just going through it now, being full-time Mac Sparky and dropping the law practice, right? It's a big move.
Yeah. I mean, there are some people in my personal life who are just viscerally angry with me about this. And, it's weird, but, life is about change. You got to deal with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think it makes sense, especially for you, man. Like it's such a big move, but like, we only have so many, I feel like I'm getting deep here, but like you only have so much time on earth. You got to appreciate it. You got to do what makes you happy, And as long as you can pay the bills and take care of your family and everything, like I feel like it's the right move to maybe sometimes take a risk and just do what sort of personally fulfills you if you at all have the option. Like I feel like that just, to me, obviously I've been incredibly fortunate, I think as all of us have been, to be able to kind of turn our passions into careers. But not a lot of people actually have that opportunity. So it feels like it's almost a waste if you have it and you kind of throw it away because you want to kind of do the safe and easy path.
I agree. And life is short. I'll tell you what, guys. I mean, I'm the ancient one of us. I'm 53, but I remember when I thought 53 was ancient, and now it feels pretty young to me. So go figure,
The sliding scale.
But you're right though, and the thing though, Austin, is you started early, so it really gave you a chance to kind of build without any risk.
Yes.
We have listeners because I don't know if you kept up, Austin, but just like a few months, well, actually at the beginning of this month, I announced that I had shut down being a lawyer and doing this thing, and I got so many email from people out in the world who are going through the same thing right now, and they're people who really are like people who you think have made it, like heads of surgery and tenured professors and people who are really looking to make that change. And I think the longer you get in a career, the harder it is. I mean, the more inertia and stickiness you have to get over to make changes like that.
Yeah.
Not easy.
No, and I think you've made an incredibly bold move. Like for me, my big fear was just getting like my AdSense removed. Because I mean, the big thing was like back in the day, all it took was someone to like click bomb your channel, click on like 20 ads, and then your AdSense is permanently banned and the end. Like those are the kind of worries that I had. But I always knew like, oh, whatever, I'll go work at Best Buy or whatever. I didn't have any responsibilities. I didn't have my own place, none of that kind of stuff. It's a very different world once you actually have kind of built that up and you can almost have something to lose in a way.
Yeah, no, I get it. But you did it, man. And you stuck with it. And you've got an amazing, kind of presence here. And you're making great content. I mean, so often I think people get into this whole thing. Like this has been a thing in my life the last few weeks is, what do I call myself? Like, it's hard to call yourself a content creator without like rolling your eyes.
Yep.
But that's what you are. And some people are good at it and some people aren't. And it's a skill that you learn, and you've kind of nailed it down. I mean, it's the stuff you do is so impressive.
Oh, well, thank you. I mean, yeah, I definitely hear you though on like what is your sort of like identity. I think it's a good sort of way of thinking about it because I think a lot of times people use the influencer kind of way, which is I mean it's a catch-all, but it also doesn't like. I think there's a lot of different kind of people who create content, and I don't necessarily think that the influencer badge covers everything. I think it's like it's one thing if you're Logan Paul. I think it's another thing if you are making YouTube videos about iPhones or something like. But it's like I think it's important because in so many ways, even though it's gotten better, there's this sort of almost like stigma around like being called like a YouTuber or a TikToker or I mean I think podcaster probably has like the most cachet out of all of them. But it's like most people don't look at those as real jobs. Most people are like, oh, that's I'm sure even with podcasting, right? Like how many people have a podcast that has like 5 views on the side and they call themselves a podcaster and their family goes, oh yeah, sure, whatever. Like I think there's like a lack of legitimacy. It's gotten better, but I think there's a lot of people who just don't quite understand like, hey, no, this is like a real thing. Like I'm making it. I'm out here. And I think content creator to me is like a sort of that's like the best way to say it to me because it's like everyone can be a creator. It doesn't mean that you're like some huge big deal or whatever. But also, I mean, as a creator, as a content creator, I feel like it means something more than just like, oh, I made a TikTok that was kind of funny. It's like, no, like this is actually like my passion. This is what I really want to kind of spend my time on. And I think that kind of comes across a little bit better than some of the, I'm just figuring my stuff out,
Well, I'll tell you, when I say that word, half my family rolls their eyes. And so I've been thinking about this as I've gone through this transition, and what I really feel like is I've taken on a job as a teacher. I mean, I'm now full-time teaching, and the stuff I do, I try to teach people, and I'm creating content to teach, but ultimately, I'm not creating content for the sake of content. I'm creating things to help teach people. I haven't really figured out what my inner narrative is on this yet, but I mean, it is something that we all kind of have to deal with.
Yeah. Part of that change is going from the person, making something in your bedroom or your apartment to building it into a business. Austin, I noticed from watching your videos and knowing you behind the scenes, you have built out this company now. You've got employees and you've got studio space. What was that transition like, and how did your use of technology or some of your workflows need to change a little bit as you went from kind of, hey, I'm just here talking to the camera about this iPod to where you are now?
Oh man, organization was the big one. I mean, when I was by myself and I didn't really work with anyone, I mean, I kind of worked whenever I sort of felt like it. I remember like it was a very different time, sort of pre and post sort of the company and actually kind of started to hire people and whatnot. Because in those early days, especially kind of, in my early 20s, I just worked. Like that was the only thing I ever did. Like I remember I would surface every couple days for like some pizza or something. And otherwise I would just be shooting videos, editing videos, going to sleep, just doing it over and over again, which I know it sounds kind of bad because like that was not a healthy way of living at all. But there was a year and a half there where that actually was like, it was really fulfilling to me. Like it was something that I really enjoyed doing. And I think in a lot of ways it kind of propelled me and propelled the channel to hit a sort of a larger point where actually I could bring people on and sort of start spreading the work. But I think it was about 7 years or so of doing everything myself before I actually hired Ken, who was the very first employee, and we got our studio space. He flew out and kind of moved out to California, and from there, things completely flipped because like in those early days, the first couple months, we were really, really successful. Like the stuff that he was helping me make, like instantly was doing a lot better. And to me, I was like, oh my God, like we just, I just went from being me to like 2 people, and like we've doubled our monthly views in like 2 months. Like it was a really wild time. Obviously, kind of things had to settle that down a little bit, and sort of we continued to expand. But the big thing was really the organization, because when it was just me, like I said, I would just work whenever I felt like it. There was not really any kind of work-life sort of difference. And when Ken came on, we also still, there were a lot of like late nights of us just sitting at the studio, just kind of making stuff because, we were trying to, we were so excited by all the success that the channel was seeing. But now that sort of we've got, almost 10 people who are on the staff, we have a number of studio spaces, there's a lot more stuff. And, I've got a family now, so it's like I've had to kind of really change the way that the business is sort of run, where it's like, hey, guess what? I'm here at 9 and I'm out at 5. And yeah, I have to do a little bit of stuff here and there on the weekends or early in the morning or late. But like generally speaking, kind of, I do everything I can to make sure that me and everyone sort of who's part of the crew, like we can kind of come to work, get what needs to be done, and then we can kind of like leave it behind sort of as much as possible and try to, enjoy an actual sort of regular life. And that was a big shift because it was not like that at all for me for a very long time.
This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by TextExpander from Smile. Go to textexpander.com/podcast and get 20% off and type more with less effort. What can you do with more hours every month? Repetitive typing, little mistakes, searching for answers, they're all taking precious time away from you and your team. With TextExpander, you can take it back so you can focus on what matters most in your business. With TextExpander, you and your team can keep your message consistent, save time and be more productive, and be accurate every time. The way we work is changing rapidly. Make work happen wherever you are by saying more in less time with less effort using TextExpander. You will never need to copy-paste repetitive responses again. With TextExpander, your knowledge will always be at your fingertips with a quick search or abbreviation. So here's how it works. You drop your commonly used content into a TextExpander snippet and give it an abbreviation. Then you share the snippet with your entire team. Just type a few characters to trigger your snippet and the content expands anywhere you type. It's really that easy. And I've got a power tip for you. It's TextExpander Inline Search, because I have hundreds, if not thousands of snippets at this point, and it's sometimes hard for me to remember them. I have set a hotkey in the TextExpander preferences for inline search. For me, it's Control-Option-Command-I. I just trigger that, and then the inline search pops up on my screen, and I can find any of my buried snippets. If you're a TextExpander power user like me, this can really help. Best of all, TextExpander is available on Mac, Windows, Chrome, iPhone, and iPad. And show listeners get 20% off their first year. Just go to textexpander.com/podcast to learn more and sign up for TextExpander. And finally, we want to give our thanks to TextExpander, which was the original sponsor of the Mac Power Users, for all of their support.
Okay, Austin, I'm a devout listener to the Test Drivers podcast. And that means I know about how you work.
No. You don't know anything. I
know
it's all
what
fake.
you told Mike. And what you told Mike at one point was that your personal productivity, your sort of workflow centers around the use, not of Google Docs, plural, but one singular Google Doc. Please explain.
Okay. I would just say that you're working on some old information.
Am I? Okay.
Mike has reformed me. I am a upstanding member of the Todoist community.
That's good.
Yes. So in previous times, I may or may not have had one Google Doc that I just dumped a lot of nonsense in, including like some stuff that should have lived in a calendar or in Trello or any number of other places. But I've changed my ways now. So nowadays, I live entirely in my calendar, especially now that we have multiple spaces I've kind of have to schedule studio time with. And then we use Trello a lot as well. I still use Google Docs, but much more so for what it's actually intended to be used for, which is like scripts and notes and that kind of stuff. And then Todoist, like I think between Google Calendar and Todoist, like that's about 80% of my organization. It's still not perfect. There's still ways I feel like it could be improved, but compared to where it was maybe a year, 2 years ago before Mike helped kind of put me back on the right path, it was a little shaky then, but it's much better now. I promise you, it's much, much better. Definitely.
Well, that's good to hear. I listened to that episode and I was just like, I was in my car. I was like, what is he doing? Like, I'm just going to keep driving all the way to California and fix it. But Mike beat me to it.
I mean, I do kind of like the idea of saying, I'm just going to do all of my whole system on one piece of paper, or in this case, one Google Doc. I mean, what could go wrong with that, right?
Nothing ever went wrong. It was flawless, and I never forgot things or missed things or had to go and search through 20 pages of a doc. Look, those are dark days, okay? We all learn. We all grow, right? It's fine. It worked out.
Well, it becomes a challenge when you've got additional people on your team, you know, and I want to kind of get into that in a little bit. But before we do, I mean, a long tradition here on the Mac Power Users when we have a guest in is we got to know, what are you using? You know, what is your Apple gear?
Yeah. So my primary system is a 14-inch MacBook Pro. I made the poor decision of getting the Max instead of the Pro because I figured like, I wanted like the extra like ProRes encoding for video editing and whatnot. The problem is I feel like that was not worth it for the battery life trade-off. Like I'm sure, I mean, I'm not exactly, I think, the first person to complain about this, but like for me, the Max I think was the wrong decision. I love the power of it. And I like the 14-inch sort of as a laptop, but I find in a lot of ways, I kind of don't love it the way that I loved the 13-inch M1 MacBook. Like that laptop was amazing to me. Like the only thing it really didn't have was more ports, and I guess it would have been nice to have a little bit more RAM. But like I absolutely loved that device and used it every second I could from the time it came out, like for the full year until the 14 came out. Now that I have the 14, it's nice and it's better in some ways, but also in a lot of ways, it just hasn't sort of clicked with me like in the same way that other M1 did. So the device actually I use most often isn't the MacBook anymore. It's actually the iPad mini. I actually do a lot on the iPad mini. In fact, I'm actually heading out on a trip. Actually, I've got 2 different trips this week, and I'm going to only take the iPad mini for both, which I may or may not regret because there's still some issues with things like Safari not working in YouTube Studio for some things that are important to launch videos. But like generally speaking, I actually find myself enjoying using the iPad mini more than that 14-inch MacBook. It's not been that long, so I think part of it is definitely the honeymoon phase hasn't fully worn off. But the iPad mini, I just love the size. I just love that it gives me sort of all the power of like the iPad Pro or whatever for what I need, but in such a tiny form factor where it's just a no-brainer to always take it with me.
You know, it's funny that iPad mini has got a lot of people excited about iPad. I know, Steven, you're another one.
Yeah, I love the mini. I like that it doesn't have to like be a laptop replacement. It can kind of be its own thing and ultra portable. In fact, I pulled out my 11-inch iPad Pro over the weekend. I hadn't used it since I got my iPad mini. It was totally dead, so I plugged it in, came back to life. It was some old version of iOS 15. And I was like, I'm going to like spend the weekend with it just around the house because I've been so in love with the mini. And I think it actually reinforced my love for the mini that I love that form factor.
Yeah.
Okay, so are you guys using pencils with them?
I have the pencil. I use it very rarely. I'm taking it with me for this trip because I know I'm going to be taking a lot of notes. So I'm going to use the pencil to take notes. Generally speaking, though, I just use it with the smart cover.
And then what about text input? I mean, do you miss a keyboard?
So, yeah, I do. If there was a way to have like a little Bluetooth keyboard that I could like pull out, sometimes that would be nice. But I find that like one of the things, like when the 11-inch first came out, especially when the Magic Keyboard first came out, I was like, this is it. I've got my keyboard, I've got my trackpad. Like this was like everything that I had been hoping for. But then I started bumping into sort of the limitations of iPadOS a little bit more because I tried to use it like a laptop, right? And I think it was almost like the fact that I had what I had always been waiting for made me realize the things that was still missing. Whereas when I don't have the actual keyboard and the trackpad, I'm just using the iPad, especially I use it sort of in vertical orientation and kind of like two-finger type, sort of like, or two-hand type, kind of the way I would on a phone. To me, when I'm using it like that, it's sort of like, hey, wait a minute. If you've got to really sit down and write some huge amount of text or whatever, grab a laptop, grab something that's better than that, right? Like that's not what the iPad, at least for me, is really meant for. But for sitting down on the couch and spending an hour knocking out some emails or making some notes or watching some videos, to me, I don't really find myself missing the keyboard or the trackpad. It feels like it's sort of I'm using the iPad the way that iPad is really meant to be used. I'm not trying to sort of overstress it like I did with the iPad Pro and pretending that it was a full laptop.
Yeah, I really think that you're onto something. I think that the iPad mini is the iPad experience where the iPad Pro tries to be a laptop, and that's where it like puts a magnifying glass over all the ways it's not a laptop.
Yeah. And it's like, I know, I feel like especially in sort of our industry between us, it's like there are a lot of weird random things you need to do, right? Like I know for me, like there are like documents that I get on a regular basis that are on a site that just doesn't work in Safari on iPad, period, right? It fails. It doesn't let me download stuff. And so there are times in which I need a laptop, full stop, period. And like, that's okay. Like I sort of have the option. I can use the laptop when I need it. But for the vast majority of what I do on a day-to-day basis, the iPad is totally fine. Yeah, maybe it takes me 5 extra seconds to write out that email or whatever on the touch keyboard instead of using the actual physical one. But in the flip side, it's something that I can pretty much always have on me. And the limitations, I think it just mentally, I know that I'm not going to sit down and do quote unquote real work on the iPad. So I don't plan on doing that. Like I just know that I can sit down and do the smaller, lighter weight tasks that are really the majority of my day, and then I have to worry about it.
Have you played much with the voice to text, the Siri dictation stuff that the iPad now supports?
A little bit. It is really good, but most of the time I feel like I don't want to sit there and like write out emails using voice. I just still feel kind of self-conscious of that. I'm just like, so paragraph 4, please remove this red line text. Like, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to sit there and type quietly and be like, you're gonna remove that. I feel like that's more of a personal thing for me, though.
No. It is really hard to do that publicly. Like I would never do it like on an airplane or something. But
oh my god.
But if you're alone, I do find it pretty useful. It's nice when you're alone.
It is incredibly good too, especially way like even that's like punctuation and stuff. I also from time to time pull out the pencil and try to use the pencil, and it's got flashes of brilliance for me, but then it like fails in a way. I'm like, oh wait, hang on, what's the thing? Oh, I scratch it. Oh no, it didn't remaze. Oh. Like there's definitely points in which like I get really frustrated with it. So like I generally just use the pencil more for actually just handwritten notes in the Notes app, and then just kind of I copy paste that out later. But I kind of wish that the handwriting had like another punch up or two to kind of be just a little bit more robust, because I feel like there's a lot of reasons why I would love to just sit there and just write out, my tweets or whatever the case is, and to be able to rely on it and not have to actually pull up the keyboard as often and kind of make corrections, which maybe that's just me and my bad handwriting, but it still feels like the system which is like 80% there and could be a lot better, especially considering just how convenient it is to keep a pencil on versus, a full Magic Keyboard or whatever on an iPad.
Yeah, well, Apple does say that, this is a, machine learning exercise, and it feels to me like you're right, it's not fully baked yet, because I've had the same experience where like you write with it, and I generally write in all caps, with a higher capitalized letters are just bigger for me, but small case are still caps, and I guess whoever was programming at Apple never figured out that people do that, because I have all sorts of troubles with my capitalization. The other thing, Austin, is you could get a folding keyboard for that. They make those. They're like $30 on Amazon, little cheap Bluetooth keyboard that'll fit in your pocket.
I kind of feel like that might be something I want to try, not to necessarily carry around with me everywhere, but if it's something that I can leave sort of in like my backpack or something and pull it out when I need it, especially if it has, well, actually, to be fair, I don't even need a stand because I have the smart cover. I've thought about it. I probably should. I just want to be really hyper aware of when I try to ask the iPad to do too much, I end up sort of disappointing myself. So I just kind of want to like make sure like I'm in like a happy little space with the iPad. I know at certain points, like maybe it's going to be on this trip or whatever. I'm just be like, oh my God, I can't do this on the iPad. What am I going to do?
Yeah.
But I think most of those times, the keyboard's not going to be the thing that's going to hold me back. It's going to be some like Safari thing, or it's going to be some website, or it's just going to be something that's going to be like fundamental that I just won't be able to work around. And those are usually the big issues I have with the iPad, even after however many years it's been since they're like, it's a laptop replacement. And everyone's like, no, it's not.
I wish Apple would stop saying that because, their marketing team believes it's a laptop replacement, but their software team does not. I think that's what it comes down to.
I mean, it's gotten better, right? Like, I think whatever it was, the first version of iPad OS that had like the quote unquote real version of Safari that could do like Google Docs and everything. Like, that was amazing. Like, to me, that was like a huge, huge jump. But then, like, I still run into like things like Gmail, right? Like, I've tried to open up Gmail in the browser. It's trying to default me to like the crappy mobile version, and then I try to move between Google accounts, and like it still doesn't work. Like, there's still enough of those things that like I have to kind of remove myself. Like, nope, don't try to do this. You're just gonna get yourself frustrated. You can make it happen if you spend 5 minutes refreshing and doing this and that. It's just like those are the experiences where I'm just like, man, I'm just gonna grab a laptop and just forget about this whole iPad experiment. But the portability brings me back every time, So that's why I'm like, if I can stay in my little happy space, I know I'll be fine, but I can't always stay in my happy space.
I mean, part of that is a argument for a much more portable Mac, right? They got rid of the little one port MacBook because it was kind of a bad computer, but maybe there's room in the landscape of Apple Silicon to do that. Would that be something that would be interesting to you, Austin?
1000%. I loved that 12-inch MacBook, man. Like, I remember, remember that was like the first USB-C device, or at least that was the first USB-C device that I had used. I remember being like, oh, it's amazing. Like, I think I did a video of like, I tried to plug in as many things as I could USB-C because I was so excited about it. I remember I had like a floppy disk like attached to like via like 3 adapters and everything. I was like, look, this is all you ever need. And also like, look, this is a safe space, right? Like I can be open and honest with you guys.
Oh yes, bring it.
I actually liked the keyboard of the 12-inch MacBook, the butterfly keyboard. Or no, that was the first butterfly keyboard, right?
That was the very first one.
I liked it. I was like, oh, this is kind of like a typewriter or something. Obviously, hindsight has proven that to be very wrong. But like that first 12-inch MacBook, the only reason that I couldn't really use it properly was because it fell short in video editing. And especially back then when I was still completely doing 100% of the video edits by myself. It was vaguely usable, but it wasn't great. If that had a little bit more performance, I'd probably still be using it right now.
Yeah, I feel like the feel of that keyboard, there was nothing wrong with it. It was different, and a lot of people didn't like it because it was different or it wasn't their thing. And if it had worked, I think we would have never got a replacement for it. But, the problem was the space bar stopped working after 6 months, and that's not good. But they just never got it to work right. But, it is what it is. But I'm with you guys. I wish they would make like an ultralight. Now that you have Apple Silicon, just think about it. I mean, the processor in the iPhone can drive a computer. I mean, what if you just made a real basic, super light one? I think that the updated MacBook Air is going to be their version of that. I don't think they're going to make a separate ultralight, but it would be cool to see what they could do.
I love an 11 or 12 inch because the 11-inch Air that was my first MacBook. So I had like an iBook. I had a couple of like older systems, especially in the early days of the channel when I was trying to experiment. But like the first, real modern Mac I ever used was the 11-inch MacBook. And I used that, I think I used 2 or 3 generations of the MacBook Air for a while because it was just powerful enough to edit my videos. And I love that portability. So yeah, no, if they ever do, obviously, there'll be a new MacBook Air. I feel like it's probably going to be the same size though, or roughly of the current one, which I'm sure is the correct size for 95% of the market. But for me, if there was something that was a little bit smaller that still had put an M2 chip in it, just give me enough performance. I don't need anything crazy. But let me do that and then also have a super lightweight device. I don't care if I have, one port. I don't care. I'll take a butterfly keyboard. I don't care. I just want something that's really tiny that I can carry around with me. And realistically, that would be my do everything device. I wouldn't carry an iPad. I wouldn't carry a MacBook Pro. I would do everything on a super thin, light MacBook Air. But I feel like if the MacBook Air still is that 13, 14-inch size, then I'd rather probably have the extra performance of the Pro. I really only want it if I've got the super, super small size to go along with everything else.
So we've talked about the Mac and the iPad, but what are you carrying as far as an iPhone?
So I had a glorious, amazing year with the iPhone 12 mini. I had a lot of great times with that phone. It was my favorite iPhone, I think, ever. I think it's safe to say. It was not perfect, but I loved the mini. But when the 13 came out, I saw the new camera on the Pro and ProRes and 120 hertz. And so, yeah, I'm on the iPhone 13 Pro now. I don't love it. Every time I look at my little iPhone 12 mini, which now just kind of sits there on my bedside, and I use it for like music and watching video and stuff. Every time I pick it up, I'm like, oh, yes, the correct size for a phone. So I would go back to the mini if I could. But the camera, like we actually use the iPhone 13 Pro camera. We use that for a lot of our videos, like not even just like sometimes I'll throw like an extra mic on it or whatever, but like a surprising amount of our videos are actually shot on the iPhone 13 because it's so seamless, so simple. And even without shooting in Pro, it's just a regular 265, 4K 24 looks amazing. So that is really the main reason why the iPhone 13 Pro has remained and I haven't sort of jumped ship to the mini, even though not gonna lie, I think about it probably on like a monthly basis of like, let me enjoy the last mini before it rides off into the sunset.
Okay, so can I just go down a little rabbit hole with that for a minute? Because this is something very much on my mind lately. Shooting video with the iPhone, the current, Pro iPhones versus a big boy camera. Can we do that for a second, guys? Is that all right? Yeah. I'm like, I'm trying to get better at the way I shoot video. I've got a nice Sony camera. I shoot a lot of my in-studio stuff with the Sony. But my wife is like a massive Disneyland fan. And Austin, you get this. You're local. So I tried bringing the Sony camera to Disneyland, and I got some good footage there. But number one, I was panicked the whole time. Like, what if this thing, it's like $2,000 by the time you add up the lens and everything. It's like I bang this into a trash can or falls out of my bag. I'm gonna just sit there and weep like a baby. And then. So then I started trying the phone. And the one thing I found, while the phone footage isn't quite as good, the stability on the phone is crazy. I mean, like I cannot get that Sony camera to shoot stable footage. I mean, am I going to bring a gimbal to Disneyland now? Is that what I'm going to do? And then like they do, like Sony has software to try and stabilize it in post-production. But I'm just starting to realize that for a lot of people, the iPhone video is not just good enough. It's good.
Yes. No, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Like, there are a lot of times, especially with some of the videos that we shoot, actually in a very similar kind of way to you, of like, in Disneyland, you're not really supposed to take a professional camera around. And if you're carrying something that like, it's around your neck, you look at tourists, no one's going to look twice. But if you try to bring in something that's a little bit beefier, you're going to get kicked out, right? You're not supposed to do that. And for us, we shoot in a lot of like sort of areas that we're not technically supposed to. Like, walking through a Best Buy or something, I might want to shoot a quick clip of looking at a laptop. If I bring in a big camera, 100% people are going to say something, right? But we pull out the iPhone. Zero people ever say anything, right? So like there's advantages in just the sort of the smaller size, but also I 100% agree on the quality as well. I think the iPhone shoots better video in most scenarios than the vast majority of sort of like prosumer kind of cameras. Because yeah, sure, with your Sony, if you set it up and you have the right lighting, you have a nice lens, blah, 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 it'll look better than the iPhone, right? Like you can do more things with that. It gives you more sort of capability. But if you're just sort of running and gunning, or even if you just want to set up something simple that looks nice, you pull your iPhone out, you drop it on a tripod, you hit the record button. Like it's going to sound pretty good. It's going to look pretty good. If it's in low light or this or that, it might not be great. But like it has come so far, and especially with the stupid 13 Pro with that huge sensor and the nice lens and all the processing that they're doing, it is such a sort of do everything device that for me, I mean, we're moving more and more iPhones into like our mainline production. Like we still have Sony cameras. We've actually recently sort of cycled our Red out of production in favor of the Sony A7S IIIs and the FX3s. But even with these cameras, even though they definitely give us a look that the iPhone can't emulate yet, and I don't think it will be able to for a while on the very, very high end of things, but for a lot of our stuff and more going forward, the iPhone is 100% fine. Sometimes we'll throw a mic on it. Sometimes we'll, maybe add some more lights or whatever here and there. But generally speaking, the iPhone with next to no effort gets you a great looking image that is completely passable for pretty much anything you want to do with it.
Yeah. I mean, just like going out, like even like lighting, when I take a footage, we did a shot at the Mark Twain and I took it with the Sony. and it was too dark. It just didn't come out right. And I tried to fix it, but it looked, pretty bad. And then I shot a very similar one with the phone, and the phone fixed the lighting in camera, and I get that, like, there's a bunch of videos out there that will show you, people will take an A7 S3, like, what is that, like a $4,000 camera or something like that?
Yeah, something like that.
And they'll compare it to an iPhone. They'll say, look here, you can see how it's different, and this one isn't as good. And I'm like, yeah, but one of them you already own. The other one is a $4,000 camera before you put a lens on it, And I do think that the internet needs to rethink the narrative there. What about cinematic mode? Is that where you draw the line? I know a lot of folks are like, oh, that's not good enough yet.
Yeah, so there's some props. I think it's good. I think actually we have one of our channels, Xbox Ready. They actually shoot on an iPhone 13 with cinematic mode. Now, to be fair, he uses a very sort of static angle, so it's easy to kind of like basically, if anything looks a little bit weird, he can just kind of move a prop a little bit forward, a little bit backward, or whatever. But generally speaking, no one really notices, especially if you pair that with external audio that, sounds really rich. Most people don't really care about the video. And honestly, 1080p 30, while I would love for 24p to be an option because that's pretty much what all of our content is, for a lot of people, that's completely fine. Now, the thing is, cinematic mode, I feel very confident in saying over the next few years, will just get better and better to the point where I don't think it'll ever be quite perfect, but I think it'll be good enough the way that portrait mode is good enough most of the time. The main things I actually wish I could see out of the iPhone, really most specifically in the video side, the ultra wide and the telephoto are leagues behind the main sensor and the main lens, right? Like, I think if you're shooting, especially video, right, where you have to have, the higher shutter speed and everything, and you want to be able to kind of push up ISO sometimes, with that bigger sensor, the iPhone main camera looks great. It is very, very rare that I will ever shoot video on the ultra wide or the telephoto unless I'm in immaculate lighting, or unless I really, really need to zoom in, or really, really need to sort of keep a super wide angle. So that's, I think, actually what I would love to see more. I think the standard wide angle on the iPhone is basically good enough. I'm sure they'll continue to improve. But like, if that just stays the same for a couple years, I'll be totally fine. I just love to see some of that same quality come over to both the ultra wide as well as the telephoto lenses.
Yeah, I totally agree. I've come to discover that the wide and the zoom are buttons that you never press when you're shooting video. Yeah.
I mean, unless you're in great lighting. In great lighting, they're all right. But you need to be like basically shooting like in sunlight, really, because the drop and everything is just, it's very apparent. It does not look anywhere near as good.
This episode of Mac Power Users is made possible by Indeed. Maybe you're successful in business because you love doing the research, whether it's the state of the market or the next right hire, but you're probably low on hours and you still want to do a good job hiring. So where do you go for help? It's time for Indeed, because Indeed is the hiring partner where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. And Indeed is the only job site where you're guaranteed to find quality applications that meet your must-have requirements, or else you don't pay. Instead of spending hours on multiple job sites hoping to find candidates with the right skills, you need one powerful hiring partner that can help you do it all. Indeed partners with you on every step of the hiring process. Find great talent through time-saving tools like Indeed Instant Match, assessments, and virtual interviews. With Instant Match, as soon as you sponsor a post, you get a short list of quality candidates with resumes on Indeed that match your job description, and you can invite them to apply right away. Plus, you only pay for quality applications that meet your must-have requirements. Here's a stat for you. Indeed delivers 4 times more hires than all other job sites combined, according to Talent Nest. That blows my mind. So start hiring right now with a free $75 sponsored job credit to upgrade your job posting at Indeed.com/MPU. This offer is valid through March 31st. Go to Indeed.com/MPU to claim your $75 credit before March 31st. Terms and conditions apply. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Our thanks to Indeed for their support of the show and Relay FM.
So Austin, we kind of lost the thread there a little bit. You got me talking about cameras, but tell us, how are you getting things done? Are you still just running everything out of a Google Doc at this point? I mean, surely with all those employees, I bet you've got a few systems in place at this point.
Yeah. Thankfully, so probably the number one thing is Trello. So all of our projects live inside of Trello. I think I'd probably share the same sentiment as a lot of people where Trello's like fine. It's still not amazing, but it does the job for us, and it's something simple enough that the entire team can use. So basically we have, the cards that kind of go from like ideas to concept approvals to sponsor approvals to pre-production, production, edit, et cetera, et cetera. Like kind of the cards go all the way down the line, and it's an easy way for the entire team to kind of know at a glance, oh, hey, this project needs to be finished by you. You need to do this or that. Or, oh, hey, I just am curious what's going on with that video that, it's 3 weeks out or whatever the case is. In addition to Trello, we use Google Calendar. Pretty self-explanatory. We have a number of different calendars for production, for actual like workflow stuff, as well as for the upload flow between the different channels to make sure that, every channel can post on its own cadence and no one's stepping on each other's toes and whatnot. And then for communication, I think like a lot of people, we use Slack. Nothing too exciting there. But really, our workflow is not, I don't think it's like particularly crazy. I feel like we've kind of landed on a lot of pretty standard, pretty safe tools. I know that there's a lot of other things out there, but for the most part, as long as everyone's kind of synced up on the same page, we've got I would say mostly an assembly line kind of process of sort of, production team comes up with the ideas, shoots the ideas, lets the edit team know that, footage is up on the server. Edit team downloads the footage, starts cutting through it, then sends the cuts back to production team to kind of approve, and then we post it from there. Like, it's fairly straightforward, so there's not a lot of kind of back and forth, or thankfully not a lot of room for confusion to kind of slide in there, although obviously, sometimes.
And we talked a little bit about how you shoot it, but how are you doing your edits? What's your software stack?
So Final Cut is what we've used since probably 2015. And definitely since we started building out the team, everyone who's come on has to know Final Cut, or at least anyone who's touching footage. So yeah, everything lives in Final Cut. So we have some servers here that basically we do. Our edit team is mostly remote. They come in sometimes, but over the last couple of years, they shifted to remote, as kind of a lot of us did, but they actually were able to pretty much stay remote, which actually ended up having a lot of benefits there. So essentially, we have a bunch of footage on the server. Like I said, sort of we ping them like, hey, this footage is up, or we finished this video, or whatever the case is. And then they pull the footage down, at home, they cut it, and then they sort of send it back to us. But yeah, it's pretty much all just inside of Final Cut.
Does Final Cut, because I know that there's alternate video editing that's more kind of industry standard. How well does Final Cut work with like server-based footage and like the sharing amongst your team? Do you have any problems?
It's fine. It's certainly not as good as something like Premiere, right? Like Premiere is definitely designed for those workflows better. So we use Final Cut sort of in a little bit more basic way, where we use other tools to download and upload footage. We don't ever let footage live inside the Final Cut libraries. We always kind of keep it in separate folders and just have Final Cut linked to things, because we've had too many issues where theoretically it's super portable and you just drop a library from here to there, but realistically there's way too many issues that we've kind of run into. So we let Final Cut kind of live in its own little bubble where we, handle all the media management on the back end and just bring it into Final Cut. And then same thing, we kind of like export things out of Final Cut, and that's how we share clips. So Final Cut very much sort of acts like it's sort of its own thing. But that being said, we do have multiple editors, and pretty much all projects change hands a couple of times throughout the process. And thankfully, when we sort of make sure everyone has all the footage the same way, and we just kind of share those Final Cut libraries with just the, the project information on the inside, it actually is fairly portable. So our lives would be easier if we use something like Premiere as far as the collaboration side of things. But then Premiere and, DaVinci Resolve has actually gotten a lot better. But Premiere still has a lot of crashing issues. It's still very expensive to spend on the Adobe licenses. Whereas, the Final Cut has been much, much faster, generally speaking, much more stable. And while we don't have all the bleeding edge features, it really makes up for that in just the speed and just the reliability, which is by far the most important thing.
And if you're running Apple gear, Final Cut really is engineered around Apple Silicon, which probably means your renders are super fast at this point.
Oh, yeah. So that was the thing. We had been on a bunch of somewhat older Macs for a long time, right? So we had a couple of the iMac Pros, as well as some I guess butterfly keyboard style like MacBook Pros. Yeah. And we had been waiting, for Apple Silicon, and I had switched over to the M1, but for the rest of the edit team, they were kind of like, I don't know quite yet. So we kind of waited for, the next generation. And so when the M1 Pro and the M1 Max MacBooks came out, we basically like, let's just sort of torch it all down. We pretty much sold all and got rid of all of our Intel Macs, and so Edit Team is fully switched over to 16-inch MacBook Pros. And the speed of those things is crazy. Like just the ability to we see in Final Cut, we see exports of our ProRes. So we always export like a 264 YouTube version, and then we export a ProRes version for our own archival purposes. And those ProRes exports, they'll go at 3 to 4 times real time. So like a 10-minute video, it'll bounce out in like minute and a half, 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes. Like it is insane at how fast those things are. So it really has made a big difference, especially because sometimes, we're doing really like newsy stuff, like we're trying to get a video up really quick, or like happened actually this weekend, we had uploaded a video, thought it was all good. Turned out there was an error in the video. And so thankfully, obviously there's only so much you can do with internet speeds, but at least on the Final Cut side, we were able to fix the error, export the clip very, very quickly, and get it uploading within, 10, 15 minutes. And sometimes that can make a huge difference.
Yeah, well, I always, what I tell people is like on the old Intel Macs, the little progress indicator in Final Cut was like a minute hand. Because if you look at it, it's a circle that goes around like a minute hand. And now it's like a second hand. I mean, it's just that, it's that different,
Yeah, it's wild, man. These things are so fast. I've never owned let me take it back. I've not owned a Mac Pro since the 2013 trash can, which I like that system, right? That was a good system, but I was never tempted by the 2019 MacBook or the Mac Pro, because it's like, that's overkill, whatever, it's fine. I cannot wrap my head around how fast the Apple Silicon Mac Pro will be, especially for video, which really feels like, that's what that system is designed for. It is gonna be absolutely bananas. If the 14-inch MacBook that fits in my bag, if it is as fast as it is right now, I just imagine Apple gluing 4 more of those chips together and shipping in a Mac Pro. It's gonna be just bananas.
Yeah, it's really wild to think about how that's gonna scale. Here we're recording the beginning of 2022, hopefully we're going to start seeing these professional desktops roll out. Yeah, it's hard to imagine what will be possible, because I do have one of those 2019 Mac Pros. In fact, you were there in the audience when it was announced, and
yep,
I have a selfie we all took together, and it just, that machine being so impressive for its time, but really my 14-inch MacBook Pro can trade blows with it in most things. It's pretty hard to imagine what's next.
This is going to sound crazy, and I feel like I'm probably going to regret saying this, but we have kind of enough power now, which is, I don't think I've ever been able to say that I honestly, obviously, if I can export faster, blah, 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 but for all the things I need to do, even the most heavy duty, video editing tasks that I can throw at it, the MacBook is fast enough. I would love it if it exports in 45 seconds instead of a minute or a minute and a half. But there's, I think, a certain point in which it's almost more of a bragging contest more than anything else. Now, maybe we'll switch to 16K at one point and we'll reset everything. But we've been standardized on 4K since 2015. I don't foresee needing to go above that. We sit at 24. We don't sit at 60 or 120 or any of these things that some people might be trying, but for us has not been really necessary. And I don't think will be necessary for a long time. So it's our workflow has been static for the most part. And the power of these systems to actually handle it has just absolutely just exponentially increased over the years, to the point where it's yeah, I might want to upgrade my system next year or the year after, whatever, when some shiny new thing comes out. But do I need to? No. I feel like the existing systems we have today will probably last us longer than any system that has we've had in the production pipeline for a long time, assuming no reliability issues. The performance is absolutely there. We don't really need anything else.
Yeah, well, there's a couple things on that. First, I think that and this is just a hunch, I have no evidence, but I feel like these Apple Silicon Macs are going to run forever. And my exhibit A for that is the iPad, because this is basically the iPad chip, right? Or an advanced version of it. And iPads, I just got an email from a listener that has an iPad 2, and she's trying to get it running for her husband, and she just has a login issue, but the iPad hardware is working fine. I feel like because you don't have as many parts in this thing, we're likely to get a very long life out of this hardware. Just a hunch, but I suspect it's right.
Yeah.
And then the second thing is, I'm with you. The Mac Players audience is going to roast me for saying this at some point, because I really feel like I have enough. I got the max. I went all in with the 16-inch, and I'm running it as my production system. It's hooked up to my fancy monitor, but then I can take it and record in a different place, and it's fine. And I have a second hand instead of a minute hand. And I can't imagine, like, if they announce a cube that has double the power of this, that would be very tempting for me because I have an unhealthy love of the cube. But I probably won't get one. I mean, I don't need to spend that money for sure. And what I have is enough. I mean, I'm making 4K videos, but they're never longer than 20 or 30 minutes at the most. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I feel like I'm good.
It's a good thing though, right? I mean, how long have we been like, oh, I wish my Core i9 would stop sitting 100 degrees Celsius when I open Finder. Like, you know, it's nice that we finally kind of gotten, you know, the grass is really greener on the other side. So it's like, what do we do now?
Yeah, it's like we're the dog that caught the car.
Yeah.
You know?
It's like,
But yeah, I agree with you. Now, the other question I had for you on this whole workflow, though, is you are generating a tremendous amount of high-res video. What are you doing in terms of like backup and protecting your data? And like, just because we have a lot of listeners that have a lot of data and they're always trying to figure out how to make sure they don't lose anything. How are you keeping track of all that and not losing any of it?
Oh boy. Okay. So we have a few different servers, right? So basically to kind of run you through it. So we have sort of like a nearline server, which is sort of meant for projects that are actively being worked on, right? So, you know, edit team can, you know, when they're in the office, even though that really doesn't happen that much anymore, they can edit directly off the server. But generally speaking, that's kind of where we keep our existing sort of projects that are being actively worked on. As soon as a video is live and that we've kind of gone through and made sure that we have all of our assets and everything is kind of nicely, neatly packed together, it then goes to our sort of like midline server. That is a server that keeps all the raw footage and all the exports, pretty much everything that was involved in that video for about 1.5 to 2 years based on kind of how it goes. So all of our raw footage sits there. Once it gets moved to that server, I then back it up to LTO tape. LTO tape is great because, you know, you're buying 12 terabyte tapes that are fairly inexpensive in the grand scheme of things, certainly cheaper than an equivalent hard drive, but are rated for archival purposes for like 30 to 50 years. You do need to unwind them, I guess, every like so ever many years. But we basically burn all of our raw footage, everything that we shoot to LTO tape once the project is done. And then we do 2 copies of those. So we keep one offsite, one on-site if we ever need to pull that old raw footage. And then about, like I said, 1.5 to 2 years after a video has been up, we will then usually go back through and delete the raw footage off that server. So we still have it on tape if we ever really, really need it. But we delete the raw footage, but we still keep like the final export of the video and like the thumbnail, the captions, all that kind of stuff for if we just want to quickly go, oh, hey, remember that Mac Pro video we did at WWDC? I can hop on the server and pull, you know, the YouTube export in full 4K. So that's kind of the workflow that we have. It's expensive, especially with the amount of, you know, terabytes of server space and LTO tape and all this kind of stuff. And it definitely gets finicky sometimes, but that's kind of the way that sort of we handle our data. I'm a big proponent of keeping everything forever because you never know when you need it.
Okay, that was going to be my question because like I'm now in the content creation business and I'm tempted to throw all the source stuff overboard once I've rendered it. But make the case why I need to keep it all.
You don't. You don't. Yeah. I mean, For us, so we always kind of keep an eye toward future uses of content.
Sure.
We've had conversations with various different like distributors and stuff of like, oh, hey, can we license a bunch of old episodes of Mystery Tech, for example, or whatever the case is? And in some ways, it's easy to do that because like when we do those exports of videos, like I said, we do like a YouTube export, which is just, you know, exactly what lands on YouTube. But we also do a ProRes export, which also has all of our audio separately exported in channels. So for example, if I ever want to post an episode of Mystery Tech or license it to someone, whatever the case is, if I really quickly just give them a copy or whatever the case is, I can actually just give them the ProRes and just strip out the music, right? Which the licensing might not agree with, or whatever the case is. Or with that, I can actually chop the episode up and sort of make a montage or a greatest hits DVD. Oh, that sounds old. But you could do that kind of stuff. But for me, it's about the idea of you probably don't need it, and it's certainly expensive to hold on to all that footage. And I know a lot of other people, you know, big YouTubers and all kinds of people just shred it, right? Especially considering you shoot 4K or 8K or all these huge files. But for us, there have been times where having that raw footage has been helpful, whether it's to pull B-roll for some old project, whether it's to revive some video that we worked on years ago that we came back and go, oh, you know what, it's finally time to do something with this. Or you never know when some big kind of opportunity comes up and, you decide to sell the back catalog to Hulu or something. You could just say, oh, look, here are all of the assets. Here's everything you need. And it can be recut or whatever you need. So it's more of a long-term like insurance thing is kind of the way I think about it. But I also am just a little bit of a completionist. I kind of like having that stuff because even though I probably won't ever use it, it's kind of nice to know that I've got it.
I get it. No, I get it. I don't think there's really a wrong answer, but I do like hearing from different perspectives on this.
Yeah, it gets expensive though. That's the biggest downside. It's a lot of expense, not only in the gear and the hard drives, the SSDs and the tape and everything. It's also just expensive in just man hours of keeping up with this stuff. Not only with edit team having to make sure that the packages are all nice and neat, and then I'm the one who's sitting there in the server swapping tapes out every couple weeks and stuff. So it's like, it's certainly probably not a great idea, and there's a simpler way we could do it. But just to me, I like having that stuff.
This episode of the Mac Power Users is brought to you by Memberful. Go to memberful.com/MPU for best-in-class membership software for independent creators, publishers, editors, podcasters, and more. Memberful is the easiest way to sell memberships to your audience, used by the biggest creators on the web. With Memberful, you can generate sustainable, recurring income while diversifying your revenue stream. You might have heard us talking about the Relay FM membership program, but what you might not know is Memberful is the platform we use for that program, and they make it super easy to generate that extra revenue stream and deliver bonus content to our members. My life has certainly evolved as I've got older and went from lawyer to full-time creator, and I really didn't know how to get there as things started to, kind of increase. And podcasting was always something very important to me, but we spent a lot of time creating the show, and it cost me a lot of money not working on the other job while we were doing it. I wanted more financial independence to run the podcast, and Memberful brought that to us. When COVID hit, a lot of advertisers had to scale back their budgets, so we lost a lot of income. But bringing that membership program online, allowing the members to support the show, is what allowed us to keep that quality up. If you're generating content and you have users that you would like to have support you, I strongly urge you to check out Memberful. They've already solved all the problems, and they make it easy for you to just get back to the work of making content. I'm also experiencing that now as I use Memberful with the MacSparky Labs. Maybe you're already producing content and relying on advertising or other means of income. Memberful makes it easy to diversify that income with everything you need to run a membership program, including custom branding, gift subscriptions, Apple Pay, free trials, private podcasts, and tons more. All while leaving you with full control and ownership of everything that relates to your audience, your brand, and your membership. And you can now send paid email newsletters directly through Memberful without needing to connect to a third-party email provider. You can even publish your paid newsletter content to a Memberful-hosted members-only website, and there's no additional fee when signed up for Memberful Pro or Premium plans. Plus, you'll save money compared to other popular hosted newsletter platforms. If you're a content creator, Memberful can help you monetize that passion. Get started for free at memberful.com/MPU, where there's no credit card required. That's memberful.com/MPU. Go there now and check it out. It could be the start of something exciting. And our thanks to Memberful for their support of the Mac Power Users and all of Relay FM.
So, Austin, you get to spend time with the coolest new tech. I mean, your channel, you really cover everything. iPhones, iPads, Android phones, PCs. You've built a bunch of beautiful, amazing PCs over the years. And so you're out in the world a lot more than a lot of people. Most people don't get the chance to touch all this stuff, test all this stuff. And that kind of led me to the question of how is Apple stacking up? Where are areas Apple's doing well versus their competitors? Where are areas you think they should pay better attention? Kind of what's your feel of the landscape?
I mean, it's no denying that Apple is the 1,000-pound gorilla in the space, right? Everyone, even in the gaming side, there's a lot of sort of people want to be Apple. People want to be sort of attached with that sort of brand cachet, the enormous piles of money in Timmy Cook's bank account. Like, I think there's a lot of incentive from pretty much everyone in the space to at least keep an eye on Apple, right? And I think certain places, there's no really denying that, like, you look at the iPhone, right? the iPhone has, especially when it comes to like photos and videos, like one of the best camera setups, period. Especially when it comes to video. I don't think it's even a competition, right? Like, and you look at the, just how solid the iOS side of things is compared to Android when you look at things like updates, right? Where, a new version of Android came out a couple months ago on the Pixel. Pixel is one of the very few phones that gets updates pretty much day one. And it's been a buggy mess for months now, right? So many, the percentage of people on Android 12 right now is probably tiny, right? I just got it on my Z Flip. And look, I love the Z Flip. But even here, I'm dealing with a bunch of Samsung default apps in addition to Google default apps. For some reason, every time I update my phone, the Facebook app randomly reinstalls itself. Don't know how that happens. Not a big fan of that. So, there's certainly a lot of huge sort of wins on the iPhone side as far as it works. You get updates for an incredibly long time when people are still rocking a 6S on the latest version of iOS. I think there's something to really kind of applaud there that, even though that phone's probably feeling a little old at this point, guess what? It still works, or, that iPad 2, it might not be getting updates anymore, but it still works. I think there's a real sort of something to say about the longevity. But on the flip side, a little safe, especially on the iPhone, a little safe, a little boring. There's no flippy iPhone yet, right? And that's something that, to me, that other side of the fence starting to look kind of cool if I can flip my phone closed, right?
I mean, if you say so, we will get to that. One of the most interesting things to me in the technology landscape over the last couple of years is this processor war that has sort of unfolded. So you had Intel for years now struggling to really move the ball forward. And then Apple comes like a comet out of the sky with Apple Silicon smashing into the Intel dinosaurs. I'm a metaphorical kind of guy.
I love it. I love it.
Deep, Stephen. Really
Thanks.
deep.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, I mean, Austin, as you get to use a lot of these PC notebooks, how are they keeping up with what Apple's doing? Do you see hope for that hardware stack in the future?
Yeah. So I think you're right. I think Intel were dominant for a very long time. And I think that dominance sort of bred, I don't want to say laziness, because that's obviously not the phrase, but there was not a huge incentive to push really hard, right? And I think actually even before Apple Silicon really became a big thing, I think AMD actually deserves a lot of the credit of kind of waking Intel up, because AMD was traditionally sort of laughed upon. They were like sort of the budget option. And for a lot, like most of the 2010s, AMD was kind of garbage town, right? But they pretty much bet the company on the Zen architecture. They made some very big and bold business decisions, but they ended up paying off. And AMD sort of out of nowhere sprung up as not only a major rival for Intel, but honestly, in a lot of ways, they actually were outperforming Intel. And considering that at one point, roughly in that early time, AMD's entire market cap was like what Intel spent on marketing per year. Like the size and scale of the companies was way, way off. But AMD were still able to sort of pull off that sort of plucky underdog comeback. And I think that kind of really woke Intel up. And then, of course, Apple's over here like, oh, by the way, those Core i7s we've been buying for $400 each for our very expensive and high-end Mac laptops. Yeah, we're good. We don't need any more of those. We'll just do our own thing. I think between the two of those, it seriously woke Intel up. But honestly, I think that's a really good thing for everyone, right? Because we've got real competition. You don't have to just go out and buy an Intel-powered whatever, because that's the only real option. You can buy a great AMD-powered device or buy something with Apple Silicon. And on top of that, Apple has been sort of very, I think, instrumental in sort of pushing Intel to up the game, because their latest stuff is pretty good. 12th gen, I mean, if you look on the desktop side, they've gotten to be up there with AMD and sort of really, really powerful, gaming devices and whatnot. And then even on the laptop side with their 12th gen chips, they're not fully out yet. But from the stuff that we've been seeing that sort of since they've announced it, looks like at least on the very, very high end, it's going to be somewhat competitive with the things like the M1 Pro and the M1 Max on the CPU side. And yeah, it's going to be more power, it's going to be louder and blah, blah, blah. But it's a very far cry from the kind of the i7s and i9s we were using in the 15-inch MacBooks, which were being choked because they wanted 100 watts and the system was designed for about 45.
Yeah, I really think that Apple has become the measuring stick now, because all the marketing and stuff I see coming out of Intel is like, oh, we've got something that's just as good as Apple Silicon. And I know there's both a performance and there's a performance measuring stick, and there's also a power draw measuring stick. I'm not power draw is not the right word. Efficiency,
Sure.
measuring stick. And I feel like they're not there yet. But at the same time, it's not like Apple is actually using unicorn tears, right? This is something that humans designed and are able to make out of what exists in the world today. I don't see why, if Intel applied itself, they couldn't catch up. But we're also assuming Apple would stand still, and they're not going to.
Yeah.
Apple has had this crazy lead, in my experience, on mobile devices for like going on 10 years. Like they're always years ahead of the Snapdragon or whatever the popular chip is over on the Android side. Do you think they'll be able to maintain that lead, much longer?
So we're coming up on 10 years. I think it was really the iPhone 5S. That Apple A7 was, I think, what really shook everyone up, because I think when the first A4 and A5, they were fine, but they weren't really that special. A6 was pretty good. That was actually, I think it was right up there in trading blows. But A7 and the iPhone 5S, that 64-bit support, the crazy performance that it was delivering, that was, I think, the moment where everyone was like, uh-oh, this is gonna be a problem, right? And I think, like you said, they've sort of, once they grabbed the ball and started running, they have not looked back. The iPhone has consistently been the most powerful chip, at least on the CPU side, and many times on the graphics side as well. It's been the most powerful mobile chip since 2013. That is a hell of a run, considering that Qualcomm and all the various different sort of ARM vendors, they're not sitting still like the way that Intel kind of did for a while, right? Like they're innovating really hard. It just so happens Apple's innovating harder. And I mean, you can say that maybe Apple might be a little happier to spend a little bit more on the silicon to, buy up more wafers from TSMC before anyone else can get their hands on them. Sure, fair enough. You also can say that maybe they don't mind spending a little bit more money per chip and on the design, because they know that they'll make it back in the cost of the iPhone, whereas Qualcomm has to sell the chip to Samsung, who then have to make the money on the whole product and stuff. Like, there's definitely sort of reasons there, but I still think the future looks bright. I will say maybe over the last couple of years, the massive lead that sort of the iPhone and iPad have sort of enjoyed over the competition has maybe shrunk a little bit. I think other companies are starting to catch up a little bit, but not in a meaningful way. And certainly I don't see the writing on the wall where it's like, oh, the iPhone sort of, been caught or anything like that. I think it's maybe not quite the blowout that it was in 2013, but there's still a lead there, and I don't see anything on the horizon to really shake that up. I mean, who knows? All it takes is one bad chip to ruin the whole thing. I mean, it happened with Intel. They had some huge foundry issues where they just couldn't. I mean, they maybe weren't innovating on the design side, but also they couldn't physically make the chips that they wanted to, which completely threw the roadmap off for years. This stuff is really difficult to do, and I don't think it's likely, but it's certainly possible that Apple or anyone else could run into one of these big sort of bottlenecks that could make a big bet, and it could not pay off. I mean, the old saying in the foundry business was like, every time you launch a new product, you were betting the company on it, because if it didn't work, well, too bad. You're out of business. Someone else is gonna eat your lunch. And I think Apple's probably a little smarter than that, but also I think there's really some truth in sort of, these bets are made years in advance, right? Like, like we're using the A15 or A16 or whatever. Like, they're designing the A18 and the A19 right now as we speak. Like they think so many years in advance, and they make a lot of decisions and lock a lot of things in years and years before we ever see them. So, like when Intel was getting beat by AMD, they're like, oh no, well, we have something for 4 years from now that can beat that, but there's nothing you can do to rush that. And I think the same thing goes, where if someone like Qualcomm comes out with something crazy, then the die has already been cast for the next few years, and it's just a matter of kind of letting it play out.
But I do think Apple is inevitably going to run into the laws of physics with the existing chip designs. I think they're looking at 3 nanometer now. At some point, they're going to get so small that you can't get smaller. And we're going to need like a quantum leap in technology. It's going to become a, magic drop of goo that does your processing or something. It's going to be something different at some point. But Apple at some point is going to slow down because there's nowhere else to go, and people will start to catch up. But as we sit here today, I agree with you. I think Apple has got a nice lead, but I'm not as into it as you are. I'm not following as close. But like even earlier when you were saying how the iPhone video is superior, it's not because of the lens system or the sensor. I think it's mainly because of the chip.
Oh, absolutely. The processing. I mean, if you ever look, especially I was talking with a friend who does a lot of like 3D modeling and animation. and he was using an app with the scanning tool to kind of like create some 3D models. And he was actually trying to shoot a video, but he was using the iPhone for like motion cap. And what he was using was this app. I don't remember what it was called, but it was basically using like the raw data from the sensors. So pre like processing and everything. It was just very basic looking.
Yeah.
And then it was using like the LiDAR and everything to pull it in. And he's like, wow, I didn't realize this video looks terrible. He's like, I didn't realize how much processing is really being done. If you look at what just comes straight off that lens and straight off the sensor versus what they're actually able to pull out of it with via the 75 steps of machine learning and color and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
It's like you're 100% right. I think they're using roughly the same kind of lenses and sensors as pretty much everyone else has in the industry. There's nothing really unique or special about about that. It's really about what's going on the backside, which is why like the Google Pixel for so many years used the exact same lens and the same sensor and everything, but their processing had just been a huge leap over what everyone else was doing. And it took everyone a few years to catch up, but Google was like, oh, we did it. We'll keep tweaking, but they kept the exact same hardware for several generations. I don't think that that's crazy to think that the software is 100% the differentiator with the software and I guess the silicon with, the actual, processor and whatnot. But as far as the actual lens, the sensor that's capturing it, that stuff is important, but certainly less so than what kind of goes on in the back end.
Yeah, we just did a show critical of some of the Apple software. Some of the software that Apple's shipping right now doesn't seem like it's getting a lot of attention. But the Photos app is not one of those programs. It is getting a ton of attention. And you can tell some of the smartest people in the business are working on taking that, relatively garbage image and turning it into, a beautiful flower.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's wild the amount of processing that happens, especially when you're shooting video. Shooting 4K 60, that's like 8.3 million pixels, 60 times a second that are getting this huge amount of processing and everything. Like, it is really wild to think about just how much performance really goes into that versus something like a Sony camera, which, look, all props to Sony. They make great stuff, but I mean, that's just taking the image off the sensor and saving it. There's not a lot of stuff that's going on there, whereas the amount of processing that goes on in a smartphone is tremendously impressive.
I wonder if that's ever going to get if they're ever going to meet in the middle. If people like Sony are going to hire a bunch of engineers from Apple to try and do more of that with their big sensor, I'd be curious to see if that ever happens.
I think so too. I mean, some of that is definitely by design because they're working with such tiny lenses and sensors that they need to do a lot more. Whereas when you have the luxury of a bigger sensor, you don't have to do as much because a lot of the work is done. It's just a big, high quality sensor. But I agree. I think it will be interesting to see more sort of computational photography come into the cinema cameras and the stills cameras and whatnot of the world. I think it'll be interesting to see. But the fact that we haven't really seen a lot of that, and it's been so many years where, the iPhone and Pixel and Samsung have all been doing it, makes me kind of wonder maybe there's some diminishing returns that they're going to hit there at some point. All I know is the iPhone shoots amazing video and that it's great to be able to use it instead of a far more expensive, far more bulky, and more difficult to use camera. Like a lot of times it's easier for us just to pull the iPhone out because we know it's going to look better because we just hit the record button. Whereas if you have a Sony or whatever, you're, okay, let me make sure my white balance is set. Oh, I forgot my ND filter. There's so many different steps. You might miss the shot by the time you're actually ready to get it.
What about the tablet space? We talked about the iPad earlier, but how does the iPad stack up against, the tablets out there of the world from other manufacturers?
Slam dunk. It's not much of a competition. And same thing with the Apple Watch. I'll throw them both in the same category of they're two products that are just head and shoulders better than anything else out there, right? Samsung is probably the second biggest, or they're definitely up there as far as tablets. And Android is okay. And Samsung is actually, some of their customization has actually made it more usable. But Android's not really had much of a focus on tablets for a long time. Honestly, the main reason why tablets are even kind of decent on Android is because so many Android apps are now optimized for Chromebooks. And a lot of that work that you put into making a Chromebook version of your Android app also kind of comes across to the tablet side. But yeah, I mean, it's not much of a competition. The iPad, I think, is head and shoulders above anything else in the tablet space. And I 100% put the Apple Watch up there too, because I think people try and, there's a lot of decent smartwatches out there, but nothing comes close to just the overall just experience you get out of using the Apple Watch.
Now you've used some of the alternate smartwatches, including some of them that are round. And I know there's a lot of talk in the Apple community. Like, did Apple get it right with the square face? Should they have had a round face? What's your experience with those round watches?
I mean, look, ever since like the Moto 360 came out, like I think maybe even the Moto 360 may have come out before the Apple Watch, or it was around that time. I always thought the round was cool, but also I don't know. To me, it doesn't make a huge difference. I think a UI is certainly a lot easier to make on a square screen. I think once you make a round display, well, yes, your watch face will look better. Like I have a round watch face on my Apple Watch, and I have a bunch of sort of complications around the corners, which kind of fills it out. But I agree, it doesn't look amazing. But I think pretty much everyone who's done circular UIs, you just lose something. It just doesn't quite make as much sense. You have more difficult kind of wrapping the text around, and it feels like it might look a little bit better 10% of the time when it matters. But for me, I care way more about the actual functionality of the device. That I don't care that, oh, my Apple Watch looks generic and, maybe it's not the most beautiful thing in the world. I don't care because I use an Apple Watch not for the looks, but I wear it because I use the functionality, right? So they're fine. I think the Apple Watch, I think Apple probably made the right decision there.
So, okay, now we've opened that can. What is your watch face?
It is the California face. I definitely had to check that. I used to use the GMT face, but it was actually when I was on the Apple Watch Series 4 for a while. When I switched to the 7, the GMT face, and maybe I'm just tripping, but the GMT face felt like it didn't scale right. Like it felt like it was designed for the older screen, like real estate or the resolution or something. It always just felt like it was my old watch that was like punched up by like 105%, and I didn't like it. So I have switched to the California face, mostly because I like just loading up with complications, and I can see my decibel meter, my temperature and sunrise and my circles. I like having all that information at a glance because I love the Apple Watch. I don't actually like interacting with the Apple Watch much. I like it just being there when I look down and check the time or whatever the case is, or to look at a notification. I don't actually like to touch and interact with the Apple Watch because I've never found using a wrist-mounted anything to be particularly ergonomic for more than about 2 seconds at a time.
Yeah, and so you use the California face in the round version, not the full screen version.
Yeah, I do the round. I cannot use a watch without complications. I'm so used to just looking down and seeing all that information. I can't get away from it.
Yeah, I get it. I can't settle on a face. I really like the California face. Partly, I think it's because I'm in California and it makes me smile. But yeah, I'm with you, man. I go back and forth between. It's just a computer. Use the computer face. Use one of the digital faces. But I really like the watch hands. That's how I grew up using watches.
Yeah, actually, I'm kind of sort of the opposite on the hands. Like I've had pretty much ever since I've had an Apple Watch, I've always used the the quote unquote real watch faces. I still sometimes have to think is that 4, 3, 45? I still have to think about it a little bit. Honestly, though, I just use it because of the complications. I feel like I'm pretty sure this is the face that has the most complications that is not hideously ugly. I'm pretty sure that's why I always land on this one.
Yeah. Isn't that sad? That's how we all do it. It's like we pick the one that we hate the least.
Yeah.
That's what it comes down to.
Yeah, they should really open that up.
Yeah. Well, Austin, I'm so glad we were able to have you on today and kind of give us some insight from the other side of the fence. And we are all rooting for you with all the great stuff you're doing. I want everybody to head over to Austin's YouTube channel and sign up. This is the place that Stephen and I keep up with the rest of the world. It's where you should too. It's just go to youtube.com/Austin Evans, AUSTINEVANS. You can check that out. Then, of course, on the Relay, you can go to the Test Drivers with Mike and Austin. And what I like about that show is that you bring out a side of Mike Hurley that I don't see very often. I don't know how else to put it, right?
Yeah. Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
That's
great. A good thing. It's a good thing. So definitely keep doing that. And then on Twitter, you're Austin, not Duncan. What's the story behind that? I never got that.
When I first started the channel, my username was Duncan33303. And it was just some dumb old username that I had since I was a kid, basically.
Yeah.
And basically, I kept using it for a while, but at a certain point, I realized that I should stop calling myself Duncan because that's not my name. So I changed it. But of course, Austin Evans was taken everywhere. And so I kind of think I did it as like a joke. I think it was on Instagram first, and I just started using it in my socials pretty much everywhere. I was just like, well, I'm Austin, not Duncan. And then I just stuck, and now I'm verified, and I'm stuck with it forever. So
Yeah, that's the way it works, man. Sometimes you make a bad decision. So you have a social media account, and there you go. Right?
There are worse social media mistakes that I think I could have made. So
Absolutely. Absolutely. I am so glad that when I was a young man, there was no social media, because I would have been dumb enough to fall into all of the traps.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yes, yes, yes.
Well, in the meantime, we are the Mac Power Users. You can find us at relay.fm/MPU. Thank you to our sponsors, TextExpander, Indeed, and Memberful, and we'll see you next time.